Good evening. Thanks for joining us for our virtual biannual. I'm Tracy Prachu, the RCAW Executive Director, and I'm happy to be here tonight. Just a couple housekeeping things. Anytime throughout this, please type in your questions. And at the end, Rob is going to be happy to answer all your questions. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Casey Groves, our president, and we're going to move forward.
Well, thank you, Tracy. Hi, everyone. Good evening, and thanks for joining us here on our inaugural web experience for our biannual. We do have, I'm sure everybody knows, we have Rob McKenna here tonight with us. He will be a delight to answer any questions you guys may have. So please feel free to ask away, and Tracy will moderate this, and she'll bring the questions to Rob, and we'll have ourselves a good evening. I think that we're looking at, just for you guys at home, I think that we're going to have this thing closed up by 7 p.m. tonight. So if you're looking at what time you think this might end, then we're kind of giving an idea. Just a few things I wanted to bring up for you members, and for those of you joining us that are non-members. The RCAW, we do put on some of our scheduled events have been canceled, of course, through this COVID experience. We still right now have scheduled, for those of you who have gone, or those of you who would like to go to our annual fishing derby. That's still scheduled for July 29th at Point Defiance Marina in Tacoma. And that feel free to ask, get on the website, sign up. Donovan Gladstone is our chair, and he'll be more than happy to answer any questions you may have with that. A lot of fun out there. We still have our golf tournament that's still scheduled. It's still going to be at the Auburn Golf Course, and that date is August 28th this year. So usually it's September, but we moved it into August this year, and that's still going to be moving forward. Certainly all this stuff is going to be pending, but I just want to make sure that you guys do know. I know the questions have been asked. Everybody's looking to try and get back outside. So those are a couple of events that we do have coming up. Outside of that, let me introduce Rob McKenna. For those of you who don't know, he was a gubernatorial candidate here in Washington State back in 2012, but currently, right now, he's a partner with the law firm Orrick, Henderson, and Sutcliffe, and he's a member of the Seattle and the DC offices. He served as a two-term attorney general here in Washington from 2005 to 2013. Some highlights, of course, he successfully argued 3 cases in front of the U.S. Supreme Court and negotiated 3 of the largest consumer protection settlements in national history, which involved the mortgage lending and servicing side of things. Rob served as the president of the National Association of Attorney Generals from 2011 to 2012. While he was the president, he created and led a national initiative to combat human trafficking, which still continues today, by the way. His fellow attorney generals honored him in 2011 with the Kelly Wyman Award for Outstanding Attorney General in America. So really, really big stuff, and he's very accomplished in his field. So we're really honored to have him here. He has 4 grown children, lives in Seattle with his fiance. He was an E-Hill Scout, so he's still active in the Boys Scouts as well as Livewire and Eastside Domestic Violence Prevention Program. So he's staying very active in our community, and we certainly are very delighted to have Rob with us and support the RCAW. So welcome, Rob, and I will hand it over to you.
Great, Casey, thanks. And thanks a lot, Tracy, for inviting me. I really appreciate it. I had the opportunity to speak to many of you at the dinner, I think it was in South Center at the Doubletree a couple of years ago, and really enjoyed that. And I'm happy to be invited back again to share some perspectives with you. I have to say that when Tracy and I were talking a few months ago about this opportunity and about what I would be talking about, I think we had a very different idea of what I might be focused on. The world has changed since late January, early February, and so not surprisingly, I'm going to be focusing my remarks on how I think that changed world is going to be affecting politics in our country and in Washington State for the rest of this year and beyond. Because the impacts that the COVID-19 pandemic is having and will continue to have on individual lives, on voters, on our economy are really profound, and we're really just beginning to see what that might look like for this year and beyond. So what I thought I would do is talk for about 15 minutes and just give some overview thoughts on the political environment, the economic environment, what it means for business owners and public policy. And then we'll open it up to questions. I hope that you'll submit questions to Tracy, who can moderate them on the screen. I'm happy to answer as many as we have time for. We're going to try to go till about 7 or so. I have a hard stop at 7, and we'll try to get those questions answered before then. So where do we want to start? I think that number one, I want to talk about where we were and where we are. 2 months ago, and it's hard to believe it was only 2 months ago. We were all of us who follow politics were very, very focused on the presidential race and of course on the Democratic primary. Who would be the Democratic primary winner? We were watching debates and watching Democrats, really try to figure out who their standard bearer would be. We had a booming economy, record low unemployment, low inflation, rising wages, and rising real incomes. We saw state revenues for the state budget rise to ever loftier levels. Consider this, 10 years ago, the state biennial budget, its 2-year budget, was about $28 billion. The current biennial budget is about $54 billion. From 28 billion to 54 billion in just 10 years. And a lot of that growth has happened in just the last 4 years or so. It's been really amazing. So as a result, the 2020 legislative session in Olympia was pretty uneventful as these things go. It was a short session. Every other year they only meet for 60 days. They got done on time. It was, I would say, fairly uneventful. There wasn't much appetite for tax increases because they had the luxury to decide how to spend a bunch of additional money that a booming economy was producing for them. So the legislature was relatively quiet. Now you look at the situation we're in, and it's breathtaking how different it is. For politics, I would say, what presidential race? It's amazing how that's dropped off the radar screen after all the attention it was getting. It was driving the news cycle, the presidential race, until the pandemic really took off. The economy could not be more different. I think we're probably headed to 20% unemployment, at least for a while. We may be headed to the return of inflation later this year and next year as the Federal Reserve desperately tries to pump money into the economy. We're obviously headed to unbelievable levels of national debt as the federal government on a bipartisan basis spends trillions of dollars trying to keep people afloat and keep small businesses afloat. I'm sure some of you know people, or maybe you have yourself applied for government loans that have been made available to try to keep smaller businesses going. That's all really important, and it's going to add to the national debt and put pressure on policymakers to consider proposing tax increases later this year and next year. State and local governments are bracing for big shortfalls in their revenues. They're going to turn from 10 years of growth in their budgets and 10 years of really fast-growing revenues to dealing with major budget cuts for the first time since the Great Recession, 2007, 8, and 9. That means that some of them in the state legislature or the governor's office are going to be pushing for tax increases. Some of them are going to remember the old political line that you should never let a good crisis go to waste, and we'll see this as an opportunity to push even harder for state and local income taxes, something that I've always thought was a bad idea. In fact, I just won a case in the Washington state courts to defeat Seattle's income tax, which they passed a couple of years ago in order to try to create a test case, hoping the Supreme Court would allow progressive income taxes in our state. We got that done, and the next thing you know, the economy's starting to go in the tank, and we already see legislators arguing that we must have a state income tax and we should allow cities and counties to enact local income taxes. So that's going to be a big issue in the 2021 session. In fact, I think it's pretty safe to say that the 2021 legislative session, which was, of course, already going to be a session to adopt the 2-year state budget, is going to be all about taxes and spending. But I also think that there's going to be a lot of pushback from voters and obviously some of the legislators against tax increases, because people just aren't in the mood to pay higher taxes. They're going to want government to tighten its belt, just like they're having to tighten their belts in their families and in their businesses. I saw some poll results from California, not exactly a conservative stronghold. 82% of the voters, when asked, would you favor increasing taxes to help get through this recession and help the state budget? 82% of the voters who responded to that survey said, heck no, we don't want to see tax increases at this time. So it's going to be a real interesting debate that unfolds across this country in state government and local governments as revenues start to fall off and governments face some really tough decisions. So what does all this mean for politics? Well, let's talk about the elephant in the room, the presidential race. It kind of blots out the sun, especially this year. There's so much that's been riding on it. So much attention's been paid to it. Record levels of turnout in the primaries so far. It's really been quite remarkable. One of the facts of presidential politics dating back 120 years to 1900 is that no incumbent president has failed to win a second term when the economy is good. So if there's no recession, presidents get reelected. That's the rule of thumb. On the other hand, no president running for re-election when the country is in a recession has been rewarded with a second term for the last 120 years, except one time in 1924, when for some reason Calvin Coolidge he took over from Harding and then had to run for office in 24 in his own right. He was elected during a small recession. But in every other year that we've had a recession and the president's been on the ballot, even when it's been a mild recession like the one that President George H.W. Bush faced back in 92, every one of those presidents has lost. Now, having said that, we've never had a recession like the one that we're headed into. Never. We've never seen the economy go from full employment to 20% unemployment in a month, essentially. We don't know what it really means for the long-term prospects of the economy. We do know that voters were feeling flushed in February, and they're feeling very, very stressed right now. So we'll have to see how that plays out for President Trump and his election prospects, what it means for every incumbent who's running for office. I'll talk more about that in a minute. But let me talk for a minute about state elections. Washington State is one of only 10 states in the country that elects its statewide elected officials the same year the president is on the ballot. Only 10 states elect their governor when the president is also on the ballot, and there are other statewide elected officials. And it makes a big difference to outcomes in elections. It's a pretty safe bet that we would have elected a Republican governor in 2004 and 2008 and 2012 if we'd been running in those elections in an off year. In fact, 2 years after I ran for governor in 2012 and lost by 3.5%, there were Republicans elected governors in states that are very blue, like Massachusetts, Vermont, Maryland, and Illinois. All 4 of those states in the off year elected Republicans. So the fact that we elect our governors and our attorneys general and other statewide officials during the presidential year is a pretty big factor in how those elections turn out, because the presidential years feature the highest Democratic voter turnout in the 4-year election cycle. This year, 2020, it's going to be pretty tough to be running for election or for re-election. It's going to be a lot harder to raise money. People aren't going to be feeling particularly flush or generous, and so they're going to be giving less money to political candidates. It's obviously really hard to meet voters. A lot of candidates are holding their campaign kickoffs online because they can't have gatherings to meet with their supporters in person. But it's going to be even tougher to challenge an incumbent. I think if you're running against someone who's already holding the office, if you're running against Governor Inslee or Attorney General Ferguson, you're running for a legislative seat, it's going to be hard because you have the same problems that the incumbents have about fundraising and meeting voters without the advantages of incumbency, like higher name ID, an opportunity to use your office to demonstrate leadership and cement your support with voters and so on. So on balance, this year, I think in our state elections, from the governor's race on down, is more favorable for incumbents, as hard as it is. At the same time, it's more important than ever for people to run for office and challenge incumbents in order to give voters a real choice. So I think that I think it's good that we have people running for offices up and down the ballot, challenging the incumbents who are seeking another term. The big unknowns in this election are obviously, number one, how COVID-19 is going to affect the 2020 election, starting with the presidential election. On the one hand, we know that in February and before, people were highly motivated to participate in the presidential election. They were turning out for caucuses in Iowa and other states. They were turning out to vote in primaries in record numbers, very energized on both sides. Republican and Democratic voters alike were highly energized. But nevertheless, now we're in a very different situation, and there are a lot of people wondering how it's going to affect voter turnout in November. Now, here in Washington State, that isn't going to be as big of an issue because we've been a vote by mail state now for about 10 years. We basically, and even before then, a majority of people were voting by absentee ballot because we made it easy to become a permanent absentee voter. But most states don't vote by mail. In fact, most states make it pretty darn hard to be a voter who's an absentee voter. They make it hard to get an absentee ballot. You have to ask for a new one every time. And a lot of states don't have the idea of permanent absentee voters. In those states then, and this is the majority of states we're talking about, the large majority of states, voters have to go to polling places. How are they going to feel about that if there are still efforts to discourage gatherings when it comes to the fall? And even if people are allowed to gather in crowds, are people going to be comfortable doing that? There's a lot of speculation that voter turnout could be considerably lower this fall because of the pandemic. Consequently, a number of states are scrambling to see if they can put all vote by mail systems in place, if they can be like Washington and Oregon and allow everybody to vote by mail. They're doing that because they're so concerned that voter turnout will fall considerably, and the Democrats, the Democratic leadership is a little bit panicked about this, and I can understand why, because this is a very big election for them, and they have to have high voter turnout in order to win. They know what it looks like when it isn't high enough. That's called 2016, when Hillary Clinton was unable to turn out enough base voters to win the Electoral College, even though she won the popular vote by a few million votes. The other big unknowns are things like this. How are voters going to think about their elected officials from the president on down when they go to vote this fall? I mentioned already that I think incumbents have an advantage because they are incumbents and they have higher name ID and they're able to raise money more easily. But on the other hand, they also have a lot of responsibility. This is happening on their watch. Not that it's their fault that we have an epidemic or a pandemic, but I mean, it's obviously on their watch how government responds to the pandemic and how effective it is in that response. I think from governors to, especially for governors, county executives, the president, people are going to be evaluating them in terms of how effective the response has been. In some places, they might be criticized for not shutting things down sooner to prevent a more serious pandemic. In other places, they might be criticized for leaving a shutdown in place for too long. For example, a friend of mine in Wisconsin told me today that their governor has extended the stay-at-home order for Wisconsin all the way through Memorial Day, and people are not very happy about it. There's talk of lawsuits and there are protests. I think Tracy mentioned hearing about a protest in Olympia that's being planned. People are starting to get restless, and at some point, They're going to be weighing the risk of pandemic and what that entails against the risk of economic ruin and what it means for their ability to feed their families. So these tensions are very real, and we're quite early in that process of sorting out what the right policy responses are. And voters are going to have the next, basically almost 7 months to decide how well they think their elected officials, and especially their executive elected officials, have done in handling this crisis. There's a lot more to see, and I don't think that story is even nearly completely written. We'll see how those elected leaders do over the next couple of months, and then we'll see if what they do works and whether or not we have a second wave of pandemic, of a new round of infections this fall, a few months after people are allowed to leave their homes and go back to work, to go to gatherings and so forth. The other big unknown, I'll close with this point, is the economy. How long is this recession that we're clearly headed into going to last? My law firm works with a large bank and their economists to understand macroeconomic trends, so we can plan our own budgets and inform our own strategy. And the big bank economists that we have been talking to say that typically it takes 12 to 15 months to come out of a recession, which is driven by an event, like 9/11, for example. About a 12 to 15 month process of coming out of the recession and getting back to a growing economy. The harder question, I think, here is, how much of a guide is that experience? We are losing huge numbers of jobs. A lot of folks will be able to go back to work, but some people won't have jobs to go back to because the businesses they work for no longer exist, or because the businesses they work for decide to, not restore all of the jobs that they cut, not bring back everybody who was laid off. So I've seen forecasts that say we won't get back to pre-pandemic employment levels for up to 3 years. Maybe by the end of 2022, maybe by 2023. No one really knows. Hopefully it'll be a lot sooner than that, but the fact is no one is really sure. And I think that's, more than anything, is going to be the biggest driver in our economy. If you're not employed, or you're not sure you're going to get your job back, if you do get your job back but you're not sure you're going to keep it, you're obviously going to be a lot more constrained about your spending. And our economy is still driven by consumer spending more than any other single factor. Spending on everything from clothes to cars to new roofs and new houses. So I think that this is the trillion-dollar question, really. It's whether or not we'll be able to push back against that unemployment level that I was talking about, and get people back to work, so that unemployment levels are at a historically reasonable level within a couple of years. Unfortunately for President Trump and for anyone who's holding office right now, that's not going to be by this November. We're still going to have double-digit unemployment, quite possibly, by this November. And the question will be, how much of that will voters pin on the incumbents? How much of the fall will the president take? How much will people vote based on how they felt in February, when their 401ks were looking really good and they saw rising wages and income, versus how they're going to be feeling the uncertainty they're going to be experiencing this November? It's going to be stressful and at the same time very, very interesting and kind of fascinating to watch. But I often remind myself it's a lot more fun to read history than to live it. Living history actually turns out to be kind of uncomfortable, and I think we're in for another uncomfortable 6 to 12 to 18 months. So with that, I'm happy to answer questions. And again, Tracy and Casey, thanks so much for the opportunity to join everybody tonight.
We do have a couple questions here. How much is in the current state of Washington's budget for unemployment? And when will we run out of funds for unemployment? And then do we become reliant on the feds?
I don't think we're going to run out of money for unemployment for a couple of reasons. Number one, the legislature put in extra money before they adjourned in March. They added another $200 million, and they could see this coming. Number two, we have a $3 billion rainy day fund. It's there for emergencies. This definitely qualifies as an emergency. And I think that'll help keep us afloat. Number three, they can move money around in the state budget if they call a special session to do so. And by the way, in order to tap the rainy day fund, the governor will have to call a special session. So watch for that to happen, perhaps late spring or this summer. I think that's pretty likely to occur. So I don't think that the state will run out of unemployment insurance resources. But then again, we've never been through this before. And I don't know about any of you, but I don't remember an economy with 20% unemployment. I hope that Washington State, the home of Amazon, Microsoft, and tech companies that are weathering the storm better than most, will not feel it, not see unemployment as high as we're clearly going to see in other parts of the country.
The next question is, do you think that we'll end up with mail-in voting nationwide? Do you think that will get through?
No, and it's because you have to adopt mail-in voting on a state-by-state basis. You can't adopt mail-in voting nationally because under the US Constitution, each state is responsible for its own election system. Each state decides what kind of elections we're going to have. That's why some states have primaries, some states have caucuses. It's why some states have closed primaries where you can only vote for the Republicans or the Democrats or Libertarians, and other states allow you to vote, only a few of us, allow you to vote from whoever you want. So mail-in voting is going to require each state to decide they want to adopt it. And there are entrenched interests that don't like mail-in voting. The political parties prefer poll voting. They think that allows them to reach voters differently, and they're really dug in on it. So Republicans and Democrats alike, and states that discourage mail-in voting are not going to be eager to change their minds about that unless they see it's in their self-interest to do so, which I think the Democrats now see in places like Nevada, where they are actively considering changing to mail-in voting. So as a result, I think we'll see more states, maybe several more states with mail-in voting, but I don't think it'll be the entire country. Not this year anyway.
The next question is, how long do you think we're going to be under the stay-at-home order here in Washington? And do you think that construction will be put back online shortly?
Well, I'll start with the good news. I've been talking to folks in Olympia, and I think construction will be back online sooner than later. I think that'll happen before the stay-at-home order is lifted generally. It could even happen in the next week or two, quite possibly. I know that discussions are underway right now that involve BiAnnual, the AGC, and other contractor groups. And I actually thought they might make an announcement this week that they would allow construction to open up again. I don't think it's going to happen this week now, but I think it could very well happen next week or the week after. As for the stay-at-home order, which, as you all know, is scheduled to expire at the end of the day on May 4th, my prediction is it'll be extended for a couple of weeks, maybe even to the end of May. But if I had to bet, I would bet on mid-May. So if you're starting a virtual office pool for when stay-at-home ends, I'd put my money on roughly May 15th to the 18th, in that range. The reason I'm thinking that is that I've been following the COVID data pretty closely, looking at the number of reported cases and looking at the number of deaths. And we are definitely flattening that curve. It's been very encouraging the last several days. And what we need is a long 14-day stretch, a minimum of 14 days where we see very few new cases and very few additional deaths, recognizing that deaths lag the new cases. Unfortunately, people fight this, and it doesn't claim lives usually until people have had it for a couple of weeks. So you'll see first a flattening of the number of new cases that are reported, and then a flattening of the increase in the number of deaths. As long as that trend line continues the way it is now, which is looking pretty good, I think it's possible we'll be out of the shut-in order by the end of May 4th. But I'm guessing that to be cautious, they'll give it an extra couple of weeks just to make sure.
Next question, will you ever run for governor again?
You'll never get me out of the private sector again. I love my public service. I was in office for 17 years, but everything in life has its time, so I don't plan to do that at this point. And so that's my view on it. I guess I should, as a politician, I should never say never, but I feel pretty good about where I am right now in my life. And so I'm helping really good candidates, including some people who I think would be excellent candidates for governor a couple of years down the line. So I'll always be involved, that's for sure, because we do need to make a change in the state, and I'd like to be a part of that one way or the other.
Awesome. Let's see. This one's regarding other states, since we have mail in here, but are they going to require social distancing at the ballot box as we move forward in these elections?
They are, I think. They're going to have new rules in place. I think social distancing in some form is here to stay until we know that we have an effective vaccine. I think that's just inevitable, because we're not growing the number of people who are immune because we're deliberately trying to keep people from getting infected. That's rational, right? But normally viruses lose their potency because enough people catch them that we build up what's called herd immunity. So here we're deliberately discouraging that from happening because a certain percentage of people who contract COVID-19 die from it. We don't want that to happen. It's clearly more dangerous than the flu is, for example. So consequently, until there's a vaccine, we're going to have social distancing in place in some form or fashion. And I think that's going to include at polling places in those states that still require people to go to the polls. They're going to require people to stand farther apart and so forth. I also think that that's going to discourage turnout, and it's going to have an impact on the election results this fall.
Okay. Next question. Do you know how much the rate of unemployment will affect employers' benefit ratings?
I don't know the answer to that. That's a really good question, but I can't think that it'll be good. People, it affects your ratings when former employees apply for unemployment insurance because they've been laid off. At the same time, we can't put all of that on the employers, because it creates a negative cycle, right? If it drives more employers out of business or drives them to not add jobs back, that's against sound public policy. We want to encourage our employers to hire people back. So it'll be interesting to see whether or not there are proposals this year and next year to make adjustments to the employer and benefit ratings in order not to discourage rehiring in the future.
Next question is, who should we vote for to help the roofing industry?
I think it's the same candidate you would vote for to help business generally. The candidate for the legislature, which makes the spending decisions, or for your city council, who makes your city's spending decisions. The candidate who's fiscally prudent, who doesn't see tax increases as the solution to every problem they face. I can tell you that when you're trying to write a multi-billion-dollar budget, like I did when I was on the county council, or you're part of the state budget process, like I was when I was state AG, the easiest way to make everyone happy is to have a bigger pie. And the way you grow the pie is either because you have a growing economy or you have higher taxes, or both. So it's very tempting to raise taxes in order to expand the pie and avoid hard decisions or harder decisions about how to divide the pie up, how to divide a smaller pie up. So watch for candidates whose first instinct is not to run to raise your taxes because they're under pressure from lobbyists and special interest groups that want them to do that. Number two, look for candidates who have some understanding of how challenging it is to start and successfully run a small business. Most people in the legislature have never done that, and they don't understand how hard it is. They think politics is hard. I got to run for election every 2 years, or I got to run for election every 4 years. Well, this is really tough. I could lose, right? Maybe not get elected to begin with. I can tell you, having advised small businesses and bigger businesses for my entire career, and as a former elected official, that it's a lot harder to run a business, to keep one going. In fact, my fiance, who just poked her head in the dining room, owns her own successful small business, and she's really facing challenging times now as her clients put off projects and delay things until they get through this problem. So I think it's very important for small business owners to talk to candidates and hold them accountable for their policies which affect small businesses. The fact is, you'll hear them talk about taxing big business or regulations to rein in big businesses, but the really big corporations can take care of themselves. They have lots of lawyers like me and they have armies of lobbyists, and they can take care of themselves in the halls of Olympia. Inevitably, the overregulation and the overtaxation is the hardest on the smaller businesses. It hurts competition. And that's in spite of the fact that most jobs are created by small business owners, people who start and run companies with fewer than 50 employees. And so I think it's really important when you're looking at which candidates to support, regardless of their party, that you talk to them about, things like L&I regulations, employment rules, all the different factors. Oh, let's not forget the B&O tax. The only gross revenues tax in the country, basically. It's very important that we hold them accountable. I often say, and some of you have heard me say this before, but that my single biggest regret in not winning the election in 2012 for governor was not having the opportunity to go in and help small businesses. And we need that. We need politicians who understand why small business is so important and what it needs to be successful now more than ever.
Okay, next question. I see a ton of people on a daily basis that don't care about what the CDC says about distancing and masks. What can we do to protect ourselves against these people?
Well, wear your own masks if you're concerned and you don't feel you're in a place where you can maintain social distance. And all the usual hygiene issues, wiping things down with Clorox wipes and washing your hands and all of that. But beyond that, the only way you get to mandatory mask wearing is if the government orders it. One thing that this emergency has reminded us all of is that the governor and the county executives, the health officers in our state and in every state have a lot of power. I'm being asked pretty frequently now for my legal opinion on how far that power goes and what the checks and balances are to keep it within bounds. And the fact is, there really aren't any immediate checks and balances that you can turn to. If you wanted to sue to try to get the stay-at-home order lifted sooner, you probably wouldn't succeed. The laws that we have on the books give our executive office holders, like the governor, a lot of power in situations like this. It doesn't mean that it can go on forever. It doesn't mean there aren't ultimately some limits, but in the short run, they have a lot of power. Therefore, if the governor of any given state decided to order people to wear masks on, and if they don't wear a mask, they could risk being cited for that, they probably would have the power to do it at this point. And they have, just like they have the power to require businesses to shut down. In some parts of our country, they've had the power to tell people you don't get to travel at all. You don't get to drive, ride a bike, ride a motor scooter. That's the rule they put in place in the Bay Area initially. And they're serious about it. Up here, we're asking people to stay home, and we're telling businesses they can't operate unless they're an essential business, but you're not seeing a lot of out-and-out enforcement right now. The power to increase the amount of enforcement, though, is there. Do I think that's going to happen? Probably not, as long as we continue to see strong evidence that what we're already doing is working. And in fact, we see that evidence. What we're doing now seems to be working. As long as that continues to be true for the next 2 to 4 weeks, I think we'll get to go back to work and not have to wear masks. On the other hand, if the virus comes back, they might try new things like requiring everyone to wear a mask when they're out in public. I could see that happening at some point this year, at least in some places in our country.
This is just a comment. Tell him he should run for president.
Do I look crazy? But thank you, I appreciate it.
Next question, does the president have the power to open states back up over the governor?
Great question. No. Okay, I apologize if I sound like a law school professor for the next 2 minutes, but let me explain to you why this is. It's a great opportunity to remind everybody about the structure of our government in America. We are a republic. As Benjamin Franklin said right after they adopted the Constitution or finished writing it, he was asked, what form of government have you created? He said, a republic, if you can keep it. It's never been tried before. And when I say that we're a republic, it means that we are the United States of America. We are not a country like France or Japan or China, where where most power is in the central government, in the national government. our states and our local governments have a lot of their own authority. Our Constitution says that unless we have given certain powers to the federal government, those powers are with the state government and with the people. It's the 10th Amendment to the Constitution. Now, one of the major areas that the Constitution leaves to the states is the protection of public health and welfare. Let me give you an example. You'll remember back in the days when states started shifting to the 55-mile-an-hour speed limit. It was really designed to conserve fuel during one of the OPEC oil crises back in the 1970s. But the federal government could not force the states to adopt a 55-mile-an-hour speed limit, even though the interstates were built with federal money. Another example, the federal government could not force states to raise the drinking age to 21, even though the Congress and the president decided that would be a good idea. They couldn't force the states to do that because, again, the states have control over issues like the drinking age and the speed limit, things that directly relate to public order, public safety, and health. So in those instances, in those cases, the federal government got what it wanted by bribing the states or coercing them, depending, either by offering them money or by threatening to withhold money to get them to do what the federal government wanted them to do. 55-mile-an-hour speed limit, raise the drinking age. We can think of other examples as well. Consequently, it's easy to see why the president doesn't have the authority to order states to lift their stay-at-home orders. Those stay-at-home orders or shelter-in-place orders are based on a declaration of a state of emergency. And that's a decision that state laws give to the governor or sometimes other groups or individuals like a health officer at the local level, but it's clearly within the control of the states. One of the interesting questions I've gotten that's related to this is, could a state close its borders so that you would not be allowed to travel from Oregon to Washington or from California to Nevada? The answer is, yeah, probably so. Could the president then order a state to open its borders back up? Nope, don't really know, but on the surface of it, it looks like, no, they couldn't. It's only happened once. I think it involved a yellow fever epidemic in Florida. It's really an untested question. But the fact is, again, that we're a republic, 50 states that have clearly delineated powers of their own that the federal government cannot interfere with. And I think this is one of those cases.
Let's see. How do you see this playing out with the housing market, specifically home sales and listings?
Yeah, well, this is where I wish I was a real estate economist to give you a really good insight. I mean, it seems to me just common sense that if we're in a recession, even with low interest rates, that people are going to pull in their horns. So I think we have to expect, at a minimum, a flattening of real estate values and quite possibly declining real estate values. I suppose a counter trend would be that fewer houses go on the market. Maybe people will decide to stay in place and not sell their homes because they want to see what happens. But I will say, as the weather gets better in my neighborhood here near University of Washington in Seattle, we notice as we take our dogs on their daily walk to get out of the house for a while that we see more for sale signs popping up. So maybe I'm wrong and inventory will be normal or close to normal. But it's hard to see prices, at least staying flat, if not going down, just because of the economic uncertainty. So that would be my prediction.
What politicians are on the horizon that meet the criteria you just spelled out?
Well, I'm a big fan of several. I'm a big fan of Bruce Dammeier, the Pierce County executive. I supported him in his election to become county executive, and I worked with him when he was in the state legislature, where he was terrific. Hang on just a second. Got to plug my computer in. It's got the low battery warning.
Uh-oh.
There we go. We're good. I really like Bruce a lot. I'm a fan of J.T. Wilcox, the state representative, who's the House Minority Leader in Olympia. I think he's terrific. I think we've got some great members of Congress. Jamie Herrera Butler, Kathy McMorris Rogers, Dan Newhouse, big fans of theirs. And I also really like and I'm close to Kim Wyman, our Secretary of State. I think she would be a terrific candidate for governor. She's decided to run for re-election as Secretary of State instead, but I think that she has all the makings of an excellent governor. if she chose to run. I'm also paying a lot of attention to who's running for the state legislature and supporting good candidates in legislative races, because that body is so important to everything we care about in terms of spending and taxes and regulations. So I encourage everyone to really pay attention to who represents them in the state legislature and keep your eye out for new talent in where you live.
Let's see, it's kind of a long one. What are local restaurant openings going to look like? Every other table, half as many people, disposable menus, temp checks at the door, which transfer to bars and events?
Yes, you nailed it. I think that question nails it. I mean, what we're already seeing in the news, where they're talking about reopening restaurants with those kinds of limitations, and I think that will happen at least for the first few months, because I think we're going to come out of this shutdown, the stay-at-home world, the same way we came into it, which is somewhat gradually. The bars and restaurants closed before we were all told to stay home and work at home. And I think that they will open. They might possibly open after we're allowed to go back to work, and when they do open, that they'll be required to operate under those kinds of restrictions. And I feel really badly about that, because I have several friends who own restaurants and employ a lot of people, and it's a tough business anyway. Tough margins, long hours, and this is just going to make it that much harder. The only thing it's better than is being shut down or only being allowed to sell takeout food, which just doesn't pay the rent, much less anything else. So I think as a sports fan, I also think about whether or not we're going to get to go to any baseball games this year, Seahawks games later this year, Husky football games or Cougar games. I don't know. I wonder whether we're going to have major sporting events anytime, or major concerts anytime before this fall, frankly.
Okay. The money for the SBA loans ran out today. Do you think that there is going to be any more money added to that fund?
I think so. I do. I think that Congress will step up with another $500 billion, which I say like, oh, that's just nothing. It's just $500 billion. It's amazing, and we could even talk in those terms. But I do think that will probably happen.
I think that you kind of already answered this, but do you think that Washington will follow California and Oregon and extend the stay-at-home order?
Again, I think if, the over/under on in a 2-week extension, I'd say that's probably where what we're going to see. I could be wrong. Maybe Inslee will end up extending it until the end of May. But here's the thing that sets us apart from both California and Oregon: our numbers started flattening out sooner, and our curves are flattening out more than those states are, probably because we got started sooner than most of California and all of Oregon. So if you're interested in this, by the way, if you want to see the numbers for yourself, or see the graphs that show you the curves and show you how the rate of new infections and deaths has been dropping dramatically, go to the State Department of Health website, or just go to coronavirus.wa.gov and click on the link to the DOH website for statistics. It's pretty useful, and you can watch it for yourself, because I think it's a pretty good indicator of what our policies are going to be. It's what the governor and the policymakers are looking at themselves every single day.
Do you expect major changes in business, like adopting video conferences such as this as permanent ways of doing our businesses?
Yeah, I think undoubtedly we are going to see more people working at home more often, and greater use of this kind of technology. It's like I said, Tracy, when we were getting ready for this, like, this is like science fiction. It would have been science fiction to be talking about 20 years ago, right? We were still using flip phones and so forth. So I think that this is a permanent shift, because we are in the midst of an amazing experiment. And the experiment is, what if we made everyone stay home? What would that result in? It's like, it's inconceivable even 2 months ago or 3 months ago. And I think that as a result of this experiment, a significant number of people are going to decide, you know what, I can actually be pretty productive at home. I want to work at home more often. And we already know that younger people like doing that. They don't really like being at the office. A lot of us of a certain age are used to it, actually kind of prefer it. but a lot of younger folks would rather not have to work in an office. So you combine preferences with technology and with the fact that a business can save a lot of money on its real estate costs if it doesn't have to have as much office space. And I think this is a permanent change. The other thing that's I think could be long lasting is the impact on education. I think that school districts today in our state and other parts of the country that were ahead of the curve in online education are looking pretty darn smart, and the school districts that weren't keeping up are looking pretty bad right now. They ought to be embarrassed that they weren't farther ahead. So I think we're going to see more online learning for our kids, certainly for our college kids, where they won't take all of their classes in a classroom. They'll take some of their courses every semester online. So I think that's another probably permanent change that will accelerate as a result of the current experiment that we're living in.
Oh, one more. Let's see. We had 369 new cases today for a total of 11,000 cases, but that's still going down.
Yeah, so it changes a little bit from day to day, because the number of new cases that are reported has something to do with how many people are actually being tested. So we're now, one of the things that's really struck me is that when the number of cases was growing really rapidly, of course, it was because we were testing way more people. Now the growth in the number of tests is a lot slower because fewer people are showing up presenting symptoms. And as a result, fewer cases are being detected. The infection, the positive rate has been really steady. It was a little under 7%. Now it's a little over 8%. But that means that 92% of people who have a fever and other symptoms and go get tested are testing negative. So that's a good thing. And I think 369, that's a very small percentage increase. What is that? It's less than 3%. So what that means is that it will take 25 days to double the number of cases. We were doubling the cases every 2 days. So I think that this is what we were looking for. And as long as that number keeps declining, and, not just in absolute terms, but in percentage terms, I think we get out of jail by the middle of May, or certainly by the end of May.
Awesome. That looks like that's the end of our questions. So thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Casey, were you going to pop back in? Maybe not.
Yeah, I'll come back in here. There we are. Well, I would say, Rob, I think you hit a home run there with all the information you were able to give us. The questions were phenomenal. Thank you, everyone, writing in and asking those questions. I'm sure there's plenty of them that you guys will be thinking about here in the interim through the evening. I'd definitely like to quote what you had said, Rob, where I think it's better to have read about history than to live in it. And then this is what we're dealing with right now, and it's such uncharted territories that I think we're all really concerned about what's going on and how we're going to get through this, and what the RCAW can do for all our contractors and members. And I just want everybody to know that we are here for them, and we're standing by to guide them through any questions or concerns they may have. As we're trying, and Tracy's been doing just a great job, and our board of directors have been doing just a fabulous job trying to figure out how we can get the answers. And it is slow. The information that we're getting is slow, and sometimes it's mixed. So for us to try and decipher, we need to bring in experts like Rob, and Rob is just such a vast basket of knowledge for us that for these untrying times, we need it, especially through manufacturing, through business owners. We all struggle, and it is real. And as much as we didn't want to hear you, Rob, come on and tell us that we're out till mid-May, maybe Memorial Weekend. Wow, that's dipping into our summer. And it's very, very busy. This is the time of year this roofing industry really begins to blossom, and we're so handcuffed to be able to get out there. So
Well, I do predict, Casey, that the construction will be allowed to get underway again sooner than that. I think that that'll be kind of a phase in. So watch for that to happen perhaps by the end of April, maybe even in the next week, based on what I'm hearing from people with the contractor associations in Olympia. But I think for those of us who aren't in the roofing business, we're probably going to be working from home, into May.
Yeah, and we're working with L&I quite a bit about the PPE equipment, and I think companies, and I'm hearing a lot of this that companies can't seem to get those supplies to gear up for when we go back to work. For those of us that are staying back, and essential work is still out there and being done in our industry, but it's really tough to get masks and gloves and sanitation and things like that for the vehicles and the crews. So it's a struggle in itself to make sure that we're prepared for L&I.
I did put some links in our weekly newsletter for that, for thermometers and masks and hand sanitizer, where it's available right now. So thank you to Jared from Eagle View. He passed that information along to me. Can I just pop one last thing in before we go? Matt Swanson served us, really well as our president of our board of directors for the last couple of years, and we wanted to present him with this tonight, but obviously we couldn't all be together. I think Matt's on the call though. So Matt, I will be sending this to you in the mail after I wipe it down with Clorox. And we want to thank you for your service to the RCAW and for being a member and for all of that you do for the roofing community.
And thank you, Matt.
He builds a good roof too, I can tell you, Casey and Tracy. My roof was put on by the Swansons. It's awesome.
Yeah, they did great work. They did great work. Great company, and they're great for our state just the same. So they served us well, and they continue to be ambassadors. So we love that company, and we love being a part of the RCAW and everything they do for us. I guess in segue to that, tonight, again, let me go back to the beginning, this is unprecedented. We've never done something like this before for our biannuals. We're really proud of these biannuals. And we have our board of directors that went ahead and sponsored this event. So, and you guys probably heard as you guys logged in and waited for this to go live, all of our sponsors, and they were the board of directors. So they should have been listed, but I just want to thank everyone for that just the same. And Rob, I think, again, you hit a home run, and we really enjoyed you here, and I sure hope we can get you back.
Thanks a lot, Casey. Thank you, Tracy.
You bet. Thank you. And I think that we got right to Rob's hard stop at 6:57. So with that, we're going to close, and thank you all for joining us.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Good night.